Idaho Matters is brought to you in part by St. Luke's Pharmacy, now offering free home delivery. For daily medications or one-time prescriptions, home delivery is easy to set up. It's convenient and safe. St. Luke's Pharmacy, now delivering to your doorstep. Information on how to get started at stlukesonline.org.
So you can't see this, but hopefully you can hear it. Behind every Boise State Public Radio podcast is a team working hard to bring you stories that matter. So if you value podcasts like this one, please support them. Hit donate at boisestatepublicradio.org. Thanks.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. You're listening to Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. This is when we get you up to date on all the news that made headlines around our region this last week. And today, our panel includes Brian Clark, Idaho Statesman opinion writer, Clark Corbin with Idaho Capital Sun, Kyle Funensteel, reporter for Idaho Capital Sun, and Max Silverson, editor of the Star News. Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Gemma.
Good to have everybody with us today. Now, the first story I want to get into is about health insurance, because thousands of Idahoans may be losing their health insurance this year. And it comes down to one big change, the end of extra federal subsidies that had been helping people pay their monthly premiums. Well, now with costs going up, many are dropping coverage altogether, which is raising questions about just how affordable health insurance really is right now in Idaho. And Kyle, you've been following this story quite a bit. But for people who haven't been following this closely, what exactly changed this year that's making health insurance less affordable for Idahoans?
Well, there's a couple things. First, people are seeing premium spikes across the country in so many different markets. We're seeing it in whatever insurance you have. There's a chance you might be seeing a big spike in your premiums. And then separate for that, there's insurance marketplaces created through the Affordable Care Act where people can buy discounted health insurance based on their income. Now, there's usually some credits allowed for that, but in 2021, Congress created bigger subsidies for those. They called them enhanced premium tax credits. They extended them in 2022, and then at the end of last year was the cutoff for Congress to extend them, and Republicans didn't. And that's why we're seeing this big shift in affordability for health insurance on Idaho's health insurance exchange, which is called Your Health Idaho.
So, Kyle, you wrote in your article that about 24,000 people have already disenrolled. Let's start here. Do we know if that number could go up even more?
It could. So Your Health Idaho's executive director, Pat Kelly, told me that he thinks for the most part that disenrollments after open enrollment are done. So I guess let me step back just a little bit. Open enrollment is a time period of about a couple months at the end of each year where people can pick their health insurance plans, and they can switch health insurance plans or enroll in new ones, or they can cancel and not renew. There were quite a few people who did cancel at that time period after, but in the months that follow, people can still cancel their policies or be removed for not paying. So this 24,000 people that we're talking about being disenrolled, these are people who have just disenrolled after open enrollment. There were about 5,000 who disenrolled during open enrollment, which makes up that roughly 30,000 figure of people being uninsured right now. But this could change over time. I think the thinking is that folks have already gotten a sense to see how affordable their health insurance plans are. If they're not making payments on their premiums, they're already getting removed. But obviously, this could change as the year goes on, as people's financial situations change.
So, Kyle, with that said, has there been any word why most people are dropping the coverage? I mean, is it because they've been priced out?
Yeah, so we don't exactly have a list of reasons for each person leaving, but it's part of the trend that sticks out to Your Health Idaho of affordability concerns. So this 24,000 people who disenrolled after the open enrollment period, that's 50% more people than did the same thing last year. And there's also quite a few other changes we're seeing this year. Like, people are shifting to cheaper insurance plans. Many of them also canceled during open enrollment. And for people who still have insurance on the exchange, it's often getting more expensive. So it's all pointing to Your Health Idaho for affordability concerns.
And then, Kyle, how did those enhanced premium tax credits work? And what kind of difference did they make for the average Idahoan before they expired? And I guess let's step back for a second. Can you quickly explain what enhanced premium tax credits are for folks who might not be familiar?
Yeah. So they're essentially they were a bigger discount than the usual tax credits to get on the exchange. So they did a couple things. They offered first they offered more subsidies than the traditional credits, and they also offered subsidies to a higher range of income earners than qualified for the traditional tax credits. So on average, this is according to KFF, a health policy research firm. The enhanced tax credits in Idaho reduce premiums by $407 each month. That's a pretty large amount for these tax credits. And the vast majority of Idahoans who had insurance on the exchange last year got these bigger credits. It was about 87% of people on
Mm.
Idaho's health insurance exchange. That's according to a report from the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And to be
Okay,
clear, the usual tax credits still exist, but these bigger ones are done for now.
okay. So, what kind of difference then, Kyle, did those bigger tax credits make for the average Idahoan before they expired?
Yeah, I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but after these enhanced tax credits came in, we saw enrollment jump significantly nationally and in Idaho. I don't have the numbers offhand, but I reported them for a previous story,
Okay.
and it also affected a broader range of income earners, people who weren't eligible for any assistance for any credits. So the traditional tax credits were made eligible through these enhanced tax credits.
So bottom line, Kyle, what do the folks at Your Health Idaho, what are they hoping that people understand about this? What they need to know about this moving forward?
When I talked to them, they were trying to really make clear that affordability is a key concern for many Idahoans, and they wanted to make sure that folks understand this.
Okay, well, appreciate that update. Now, Clark, as more Idahoans are struggling with the cost of health coverage, as Kyle just explained to us, state lawmakers are starting to decide how to spend nearly $1 billion in federal funding that's aimed at improving rural health care. And you've just written about this. So, can we start with this? What is the Rural Health Transformation Program? And what is Idaho hoping to accomplish with this funding?
Yeah, for sure, Gemma. Thanks so much. Yeah, there was a meeting this week at the state capitol building in Boise. But what this has to do with is about $50 billion in funding for rural health care that was passed at the federal level through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that President Trump signed into law last summer. And basically, it set up a program to allow states to apply to receive a share of the grant funding with the idea of, kind of as the name implies, really improving the delivery and access to healthcare across the country in rural areas. And Idaho is obviously a rural state full of rural communities. But the state of Idaho just found out at the end of 2025 that they were successful in receiving this grant. They're getting about $186 million this year in the first year of the program. And overall, the state's expecting to get about $930 million total over the course of the 5-year federal grant funding program, although the exact dollar amount in future years is going to be kind of determined based on how requirements are met and followed in the first year. So we don't know exactly how much the state of Idaho is going to get, but the expectation is about $930 million over 5 years. Almost $1 billion, Gemma. And it's important for several reasons. Kyle talked about the cost of health insurance. We've also talked on Idaho Matters about a story I did in January talking about Idaho having the fewest number of medical health professionals in the country on a per capita basis. Gemma, what I found in January was that Idaho would need to add 1,400 additional medical professionals today just to catch up to the national average. And so access to healthcare, cost of healthcare, as Kyle talked about, is a very big issue in the state of Idaho, and folks with the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare and Republicans on this new legislative committee are hoping to guide the state as it looks to award all of the $186 million for this first year by October 30th. One of the interesting things, Gemma, that Idaho Department of Health and Welfare Director Juliet Sharon said, she told legislators that they're going to be on a very tight timeline, getting the sub-grants out and awarding all the money by the end of October. And so that's a little bit of where this new legislative committee comes in, providing some oversight and recommendations to the process that goes along. But Gemma, as we can talk about, there's a couple concerns even from the outset about the makeup of this committee of Idaho legislators.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, Clark, because this new committee, they're all Republicans.
Exactly.
Now, granted, we are a supermajority in the state of Idaho. So my first question is this unusual to have a committee that's made up only of Republicans? And what, if anything, is being said about the lack of Democratic representation?
It is unusual. Most legislative committees, Gemma, and most legislative interim committees, I can tell you, while they are dominated by Republicans, almost all of the ones that I can think of have some sort of representation from the minority party, which in the state of Idaho is the Democratic Party, right? So it's highly unusual. It deviates from practice and tradition. Democrats, actually, this committee was formed through a little bit of an unusual process. There were bills seeking to create the committee, but those bills never made it to the finish line at the end of the recent 2026 legislative session that adjourned earlier this month. And so JFAC, the legislature's powerful budget committee, essentially created this Rural Health Transformation Committee. And at the time when JFAC was creating it, Democrats, including, I believe, House Minority Leader Alana Rubel, a Democrat from Boise, said she wanted it spelled out that a Democrat would be included in the committee, and she wanted it put in writing, and they didn't do it. And so she was frustrated at the time. I think it's pretty recent. The committee just had its first meeting this week. And so I think I think the word is just spreading to the public that there aren't any Democrats on the committee. So I think it's a little bit of a new development, but Democrats wanted to be represented. They called this out during the legislative session. And you're absolutely right. Republicans control the power at all three levels of state government, and they have for decades. But this even deviates from tradition and practice because in all of the legislative committees that I can think of, in all of the legislative interim committees that I can think of, there is at least some level of representation from the minority party. So it is unusual, Gemma. You're right to call it out as unusual and a little bit of a head scratcher. But I think it fits overall within the tone, particularly in the House of Representatives under House Speaker Mike Moyle and new Budget Committee co-chairman Representative Josh Tanner. We've seen JFAC kind of consolidating power and changing rules over the years. We've seen the legislature increase its own power over the years. And so I think this is more of the same in terms of Republicans trying to control and consolidate power at all steps in the process, Jim, is I think what we're seeing play out.
Well, and then Clark, there's a really tight timeline. My understanding is to award the first round of funding, right? So how quickly then could Idahoans, and in particular in rural areas of Idaho, actually start to see, any changes?
That's a good question. You're absolutely right. There is a timeline to award all of the $186 million from the first year. That needs to be awarded by October 30th is when those need to be selected. And so at some point after that, the money will start circulating. It could be late this year. It could be into next year. It could be throughout the 5 years of the program. I think we're going to have to see a little bit because it is a brand new program. But the first decisions in terms of where the first, say, bucket of money is going will be made by October 30th. And Department of Health and Welfare officials told legislators that they've identified kind of 5 initiatives related to the funding That includes improving rural access to care through technology. It includes ensuring accessible, quality care through innovative models, sustaining the rural workforce with training, recruitment, and retention, which has been a big issue when we talk about the healthcare shortage. They're talking about evidence-based programs and investing in rural health infrastructure and partnerships. So it could take several different forms. It sounds like the money will be actually awarded to providers and recipients through sub-grants that are applied for and awarded competitively, and also through an RFP process. And RFP stands for request for procedures, and that's how many state programs are awarded. But yeah, I think the money will start flowing later this year in the fourth quarter of this calendar year, and then communities will start to see it, and it could start making a difference after that point throughout the 5 years of the program, Gemma.
All right. Thanks for that, Clark. In Valley County, state transportation officials are taking a closer look at safety concerns along a really busy stretch of Idaho 55 with potential changes that could impact drivers and future development. Max, I know you've been following this story. So, what are the biggest safety issues ITD is trying to address with this Highway 55 corridor study?
Hi, Gemma. Yeah, thanks for taking a look at this. Highway 55 is definitely our main transportation backbone here for local and regional travel. And the biggest concern is just kind of how to safely accommodate increasing traffic numbers. Like, simply put, more and more people are on the road. There's more local development, there's busy tourist seasons in the summer and winter. So this being our busiest road, it's also our most dangerous road. And our local officials are kind of thrilled to see ITD spend some time evaluating this one.
So, Max, what kind of improvements like turn lanes or passing lanes are most likely to come out of this plan, or do we know this yet?
I think you kind of nailed it there. Those are the most likely outcomes. And it sounds like a simple improvement. It doesn't sound like a really big deal, but like, this is our main route, for everybody. A well-placed turn lane, a traffic pullout, a wider road, a 3-lane section of the highway can really improve safety significantly. And the study will also look at where these things are possible. I mean, we might want them everywhere, but there's some stretches where it just can't happen. For example, between McCall and Lake Fork, there should be some improvements probably, but those might not be allowed because ITD's right-of-way they suspect, could only be 25 feet from center line there. So where we want to see improvements and where they're going to be possible is kind of still to be determined. And the study should be able to tell us that.
Okay, so Max, could the study determine an impact on future development along Highway 55? And I'm curious too, especially if it comes to requiring developers to help pay for upgrades.
That's right. Like when the improvements could really be made for projects farther from the highway itself too. Like, ITD officials said it's kind of easy to require a turn lane for a project that's literally on the highway. Like, you know how much traffic is going to go onto the highway and off of the highway if the parking lot is right there. But this more in-depth study could provide essential information for like how larger developments further from the highway could affect highway traffic. So say this huge neighborhood goes in a mile from the highway, how many turns is that going to equate to for like the main arterial route here? And that would give officials more authority to require those improvements too. Like, you can't just mandate turn lanes out of thin air. There needs to be data to back it up. And this is kind of the way you get from point A to point B in that process.
So, Max, there are also updates on projects like the Rainbow Bridge replacement. So what should people in the area know about what's coming next? I mean, and also the folks who, go up on the weekends, right? And as you said, especially with summer hitting, that Highway 55 and the Rainbow Bridge, they're going to be packed some weekends.
Right. It's quite busy. And yeah, the Rainbow Bridge is another major choke point. ITD's been looking to, replace it. The project started in 2021 with design and, community outreach, all these things. There's been a lot of planning, and that is continuing. Construction, of course, won't start till 2028 on any sort of new bridge. But the big news from ITD this week is that there will be a meeting coming up to look at plans for a Rainbow Bridge replacement. We get to see those preliminary plans May 21st at the American Legion in Cascade.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of people will be at that meeting to see that unveiling, Max.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, Brian, you recently wrote an opinion piece warning that a little known congressional tool could have major consequences for how public lands are managed all across the West. And in the piece, you argue that this effort could create chaos in public lands management. What specifically worries you most about using the Congressional Review Act this way? And I guess, why don't you start out by explaining to us quickly what the Congressional Review Act actually is?
So the Congressional Review Act, it follows a law from the 1990s that was basically set up to act something like a veto that Congress can exercise over the rules of an executive agency. Previously, this has been used for sort of limited rules. It's not been used very often. But there has been a growing effort coming out a lot of the folks in the land seizure movement to use it to get rid of management plans that they don't like. Management plans, resource management plans, are complex, very nuanced sets of rules about how different areas of public land will be managed over the scale of decades and years. They're often put together with extensive community input. They deal with input from everyone from resource extraction industries like timber and mining to recreation to grazing, all kinds of different things like that. So there's been a renewed effort to use these to undo some of these resource management plans, one of which recently succeeded.
Okay, so supporters are saying that these moves could open up more land for development and use. Why do you think that the risks actually outweigh, what supporters say are potential benefits?
Because the way these resource management plans are put together, it involves all of this community input, local input, and scientists looking at and determining how the resource is best managed. What this threatens to do is politicize the whole process. So the one that was just passed opens up mining in boundary waters up in Minnesota that was done over the objections of local senators there. So now that resource management plan has been set aside, you could foresee that happening to any other resource management plan. So the forest management plans dealing with logging in North Idaho, if you wind up with a Democratic Congress, they can just get rid of that. They can shut it down. They could shut down mining. They could shut down grazing. It turns it from a scientific agency managed process into one that is inherently political. There's another one that's under it hasn't come up for a vote yet, but it deals with Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument down in Utah. So if this continues along, we could see a really thoroughgoing politicization of the land management process.
And Brian, you're calling on Idaho's congressional delegation to step in. So what role do you think lawmakers like Mike Simpson, Mike Crapo, even Jim Risch should be playing right now?
Well, they should be maintaining the processes that they say they've supported for a long time. Now they failed to do that in the case of Boundary Waters. Both Risch and Crapo voted in favor of that CRA, while the local senators in Minnesota voted against it. Hopefully they will resist future ones, but that's not the track record they've shown so far.
All right, appreciate that. So Clark, supporters of a medical cannabis initiative say they're making a final push to get this issue in front of voters this November. So let's start here. Where do things stand right now with the signature gathering effort? And I guess how likely is it that this will actually make it to the ballot?
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. Great question. This is a great time to look at this issue because next week on April 30th is the deadline for organizers of the ballot initiative to turn in their signatures to the state of Idaho for verification. I spoke with the organizers, some of the organizers pushing the Idaho Medical Cannabis Act, and they told me that they have obtained more than 100,000 raw signatures. And just like you said, they're making a final push over this just under a week remaining. And so, how likely is it? That's a good question. It's a high bar to qualify a ballot initiative for the election. And just real quickly, I want to talk about what a ballot initiative is. In Idaho, a ballot initiative is a form of direct democracy where the voters of Idaho decide whether or not to pass a new law, not the Idaho legislature. And there's a strict set of requirements in order to qualify a ballot initiative for the election in November. And that's the exact point that we're at right now. The two requirements is you have to get 6% of the registered voters in the state of Idaho, which is about 70,000 signatures in terms of a raw number. Organizers say that they have more than that. And so that suggests that what it's going to come down to is whether it qualifies and meets the requirements in half of the state's 35 legislative districts. And so in addition to the raw number of signatures, organizers also need to collect signatures from 6% of the registered voters in at least 18 different legislative districts. That's going to be the most tricky part about qualifying for the ballot. And the organizers aren't saying publicly how it's looking in each of the different legislative districts. And so it remains to be seen. They did tell me that they're optimistic, that they're hopeful, that it will make the ballot, but I think it's going to come down to how they were able to do in some of the smaller legislative districts in the state, perhaps, and what that effort was like. And if you'd like, I can talk a little bit about sort of what the ballot initiative would do, what the supporters are saying, and where the opposition is coming from as well. But yeah, just about a week to go, just under a week to go to turn in those signatures to find out if they'll qualify for the November general election ballot here in the state of Idaho.
So, Clark, I'd love for you to talk about what this initiative, excuse me, could actually change, especially in light of what just happened yesterday with acting U.S. Attorney General Todd Blanche signing an order that's changing the federal classification of medical marijuana. I mean, we should make it clear, all forms of marijuana are illegal in the state of Idaho. So this federal reclassification, I think at this point wouldn't do anything, at least in Idaho. Am I reading that right?
I'm not 100% sure on that. The reclassification is also something that the ballot initiative organizers were pushing for, and they couched that in terms of allowing for like the study of cannabis and medical marijuana in terms of determining, are there research benefits, are there therapeutic properties, are there things that we can learn? Because it's my understanding that even the study of marijuana and cannabis had been blocked by Congress in terms of funding wasn't available, and it had to do with the federal schedule classification. And so, but you're absolutely right. The law in the state of Idaho, which is the controlling factor today, is that marijuana in all forms in Idaho is illegal. It doesn't differentiate at this time between recreational marijuana and medical marijuana. And that's different from almost all of our surrounding states, other than the state of Wyoming. Either medical cannabis or recreational marijuana is legal in all of Idaho's neighboring border states, states like Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Montana, and then Utah has medical cannabis. And so that's kind of the lay of the land. Marijuana is illegal in Idaho today. It remains illegal in Idaho today. But what this ballot initiative is asking voters to consider would be to legalize medical cannabis for people who have a documented medical condition like chronic pain or a terminal illness, something like AIDS, insomnia, cancer, Crohn's disease, acute pain. So what this would do, if it goes to the ballot and if a majority of Idaho voters approve it in November, it would legalize cannabis which cannabis is the same as marijuana. The two terms are used interchangeably, but it would legalize it for people who can demonstrate a chronic or ongoing medical condition. Then they would be able to apply to obtain a renewable medical cannabis card in the state of Idaho. And the ballot initiative would also create a production process and distribution process where licensees would be able to grow it and sell it. And people who have the medical card would be able to order online, and delivery would be available, or they could pick up at, like, say, a distribution center or a retail location or something along those lines. There would be a lot of limits in place. You wouldn't be able to use medical cannabis in public, even if you had the card and obtained it legally. You wouldn't be able to share medical cannabis with someone who does not have the card, and you would not be able to operate a vehicle, operate an aircraft, operate a vessel on water or a train or heavy equipment in the workplace while under the influence of medical cannabis. I had an article in the Idaho Capital Sun that kind of goes through the bullet points of what would be created, how it would work, and what the restrictions would be. And when I talked with the organizers, they said it's all about giving folks with terminal illness and chronic pain an alternative to prescription opioid medications. A lot of the folks involved with the effort have volunteered with terminal cancer patients in the state of Idaho. For example, both the spokesperson and the campaign treasurer have volunteered with cancer patients in Idaho. And they told me that they've seen firsthand the negative toll that opioid medications took on some cancer patients, talking about destroying their appetite, affecting their depression and their well-being, affecting their body, affecting their sleep cycles and their body weight and their overall health. And so what they told me is that this is about providing an alternative, if folks wish, to opioid medications to treat chronic pain, terminal illness, those sorts of things. That's sort of the why, in terms of why are they doing it. And in terms of why are they doing it today, they told me that the Idaho legislature has resisted their efforts to work together to create a medical cannabis program. And also the Idaho legislature has increasingly tightened the restrictions around ballot initiatives, and also has a competing ballot question going before Idaho voters in November that would make it, if that passes, that's a separate proposal, but if that one passed, only the Idaho legislature would be able to legalize medical cannabis or any other drugs in the state of Idaho. So that's why organizers say they're doing it, to offer the alternative. And because the legislature is making it harder to do this in the future, the opposition is coming from Republicans and the legislature saying, we don't want to be another state like Colorado or Washington. They've said that the Republicans opposing this are alleging that the criteria to obtain a medical cannabis card are so broad. They're alleging that basically anybody could attempt to get a medical cannabis card. And they're saying that this is sort of like a de facto recreational legalization. The organizers who support this told me that is not the case, that that's not what they're looking to do. But those are kind of the two sides of the argument. The legislature for years has resisted any kind of legalization recreationally or medically, and it's continuing to do so, saying they don't want Idaho to be like its neighboring states. They don't want to have dispensaries in the state of Idaho, and they don't want to have, maybe people being able to smell it in public or whatever, even though notably it would be illegal to use it in public, even if the medical cannabis ballot initiative qualifies and passes. But yeah, in just under a week, they'll be turning it in and verifying the signatures. And then we'll go through a process, I believe, both at the county level and the state level, to see if the signatures are valid. And so what does it mean, real quickly, if the signatures are valid or not? The signatures have to come from a registered voter. The address in the voter registration system has to match the address on the petition that's signed for the ballot initiative. And it has to be listed in the correct county and legislative districts. You have to be a registered voter. Your information has to match the system. It has to be legible. The signature has to be matched. And so those are some of the some of the things that officials will look at in terms of are these valid, verifiable signatures or not, Gemma.
All right, appreciate all of that, Clark, and I'm sure a lot of people will be paying attention to this. So, Max, let's go back to Valley County, where experts are warning that a mix of winter storm damage and dry conditions could set the stage for a major bark beetle outbreak. Why are conditions this year creating what officials are calling a perfect storm?
Yeah, that's right. Beetles that feed on evergreen trees are just a fact of life in the West. This is not just McCall or Valley County. It's kind of across the region here. But there's some factors this year that really could make things a whole lot worse with some serious consequences. And that is a warmer spring is the first thing. It means beetles will become active earlier in the year. And then a major storm in December kind of downed thousands of trees across Idaho. I don't remember if a lot of people recall this, but the power was out. It was trees everywhere. It was kind of chaos. And that gives beetles a lot more food than usual to feed on. So the trees are stressed and the beetles are really set up for success.
So, Max, is there anything that homeowners can do right now in terms of trying to protect, trees?
Yeah, the best thing people can do is to clean up any trees and limbs that have fallen. That is the main thing. Like, that's where the beetles grow, that's where they live, and that's how they get into other trees. That's where it starts. But after that, what they can do is to find out what kind of tree it is that they're concerned about, and purchase a pheromone pack, which is a little thing you kind of staple to the tree. This deters the beetles and can keep them away from some individual trees pretty effectively. But people need to keep in mind too that each tree species has a specific species of beetle that eats it. So for things like pine trees, it's especially important to clean them up beforehand because there's not an effective repellent for that. But
Mm.
let's see, fir trees and spruce trees can be protected pretty effectively with that method.
So, Clark, a boating season is getting underway, and state officials are ramping up inspections to prevent the spread of invasive species in local waterways. So, what do boaters need to know about these inspection requirements, and who has to stop?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point, Gemma. And I think the main thing to know is all boat and watercraft owners are required to stop at an inspection at a mandatory inspection station when they pass one on the highway or when they're coming on the water. But basically, if you see like a bunch of cones and signage and an inspection station and you're pulling a boat or a kayak or something along those lines, you're required to stop. And really, this is all about, like you said, Gemma, stopping the spread of invasive species, particularly quagga mussels. And quagga mussels
Mm.
have been a big deal in the state for a few years. In 2023, state officials, for the first time in state history, detected quagga mussels in water samples in the Snake River near Twin Falls, right near Centennial Waterfront Park and the famous Shoshone Falls there. And so, what state officials at the Idaho Department of Agriculture have said is these quagga mussels are non-native and they reproduce very, very quickly to the point that they can clog pipes that are used for both drinking water and irrigation, and they can sort of overwhelm the holes or the body or the bottom side of a boat, and they can create all these problems for fish habitat and for existing wildlife in the water. And they're basically saying that if we don't address this, this could be millions of dollars a year problem for the state of Idaho, like it has been in other parts of the country where quagga mussels or
Hmm.
zebra mussels infestations have not been able to be controlled. And so, really, if you're out and about, and you pass one of these stations, that's what you need to know is just stop and have it inspected. They may give you a hot wash if you're getting on the water. And that's kind of just what it sounds like. You'll pull over. I actually spent some time last summer in Twin Falls at one of the inspection stations, and it was maybe a 10-minute process, maybe a little bit less, but you pull over. There's a couple of technicians. They'll look at your watercraft and inspect it and then power wash it down with hot water to get all the aquatic life and any microscopic shells or mussels out of there. And so that's what you need to keep in mind. They're really trying to be aggressive to hopefully eliminate all the quagga mussels is what state officials are telling me. There's also things that kayakers and boat users can do on their own, even if they don't pass a mandatory inspection station, Gemma. And the message really from the state of Idaho is clean, drain, and dry. When you get out of the water, clean your boat or kayak or your fishing waders immediately. Wipe them down, clean them, drain all of the water out of the compartments. And dry everything out. They say that's an important step in controlling the spread of these invasive species is clean, drain, and dry, and follow all signs and rules if you come to an inspection station. I've got more information in an article at the Idaho Capital Sun, and the Idaho State Department of Agriculture also has an invasive species website that folks can visit. It's www.invasivespecies.idaho.gov. That has more information about tips that folks can take to prevent the spread of these invasive mussels, Gemma.
Yeah. And it's really important, Clark, that everybody follows these steps.
Yeah, they're talking about different, like the Great Lakes and different areas of the country that have been overwhelmed by these infestations. They say it can hurt tourism, it can hurt agriculture, it can make it, less enjoyable being out on the water if there's these mussels everywhere. And so they're really saying if you care about tourism, if you care about agriculture, if you care about drinking water, if you care about having fun and recreating on the river and having it stay clean, they're saying there's a lot of reasons to be on the lookout for stopping the spread of these invasive species. They're trying to nip it in the bud now, so to speak, in the early years after it's been detected, rather than letting these infestations play out, which they said could cost taxpayers potentially millions of dollars to address and respond to each time that there's an infestation. So we've talked before on the show, Gemma, about there was an aggressive program each of the last 2-3 summers of essentially dumping a copper-based chemical in the Snake River in an attempt to eliminate the quagga mussels. And state officials said that's greatly reduced the amount of quagga mussels that they found last year, and that the water sampling and water testing will continue this year and in years to come to kind of see how they're doing. It's worth noting that my understanding is the samples for the quagga mussels are really showing up later in the year when the water is warm, like August and September timeframe. So I know the efforts to stop the spread will continue, and the efforts to test and sample water continues across the Snake River and across the state of Idaho, Gemma.
All right, appreciate that. Max, I've got a little bit less than 2 minutes left, and I want to quickly get to this story, which is in Valley County. Officials are going to be doing a planning study, and this is to replace a problematic bridge going to Tamarack Resort. Can you quickly tell us about this and the safety concerns of this current S Bridge?
Yeah, sure thing. This is really one of the more troubling pieces of infrastructure in Valley County. It's been a priority for a long time, but this is the first step to actually dealing with it. It's one of the most frequent crash sites, accident sites in the county, especially in the wintertime. The bridge travels across, Lake Fork Creek, and it's icy, it's narrow, and the curves are right in the iciest and narrowest part in the wintertime. So the inadequacy of this bridge is pretty evident when you drive over it in the wintertime. It's something people have wanted to change for quite a while.
All right, appreciate that, Max. Our panelists today, Brian Clark, Idaho Statesman opinion writer, Clark Corbin with Idaho Capital Sun, Kyle Fahnenstiel, reporter for the Idaho Capital Sun, and Max Silverson, editor of the Star News. And thanks so much for listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. Do you have thoughts about today's episode? Make sure you email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or reach out on our socials. Know someone who might enjoy our podcast? Be sure to share it with them today. Hi, Idaho Matters podcast listeners. If you're on your smartphone right now, or if you have it nearby, I wanted to pop in to tell you about something to check out. Boise State Public Radio is now on Nextdoor. Here's what that means. Trusted local news, thoughtful reporting, and stories from across Idaho right along your neighborhood updates. If you already have the Nextdoor app, you're halfway there. Just search Boise State Public Radio and hit follow.